because you're talking about the lexicon, you're talking about terminologies. So how does our own physiology, our sexuality, our sensuality fit into that? Hi, welcome to this episode of Unleash Your Audacious Confidence. I'm your host, Alicia Couri, and today's guest is a phenomenal treat because it's something I have zero experience around. So I'm learning this stuff with you, and it's a little taboo. And, you might be thinking, oh, Alicia, what are you talking about? But I think it's important. It's important for women's health. It's important for our mental, emotional, spiritual health. And we just finished our Love My Body, Love Myself series. So this goes right along with this. And we're going to tie it to how we become better leaders by understanding these parts of ourselves. So help me to welcome Queen to the show. Thank you so much, Queen. And I'm not going to read your bio because I want to actually have you share and explain what we're going to be diving into today.
Absolutely. And thank you. I appreciate that. And so what we're diving into today is the erotic. And so the erotic is the energy of our desires, both sexually and non-sexually, and they inform how we show up in our leadership positions. So I am a decolonial somatic sex therapist, sex educator, and spiritualist. And so my framework is to bring in mind, body, spirit, and energy by decentering colonial understanding of the erotic and how we show up in our bodies and in our relationships. And so for me, it's been like a liberating mission to be able to unlearn and to not make it taboo
All
because
right.
there's these unspoken messages that we always respond to, and that is the erotic. And so it's not always the forward facing that we've been used to understanding the erotic. And so that's what my work is. And I really appreciate you bringing me on to have this discussion.
This is so fascinating because, yes, we have one framework when we talk about erotica. It's
Yeah.
from one frame. And you're saying decolonialize. Explain that a little bit more for me.
So decolonial is just that to not center colonial understanding of anything, quite honestly. You know, I am a Black person of African American descent. And so my very existence is related to the impact of the genocide of Turtle Island and the enslavement of African folks in early American colonial history. And so there were messages that came out of societal messages and that came out of and that continue to kind of police and inform our authenticity. And so for me, part of my authenticity had to be to challenge what I was taught about my self-worth and what
Mm.
space I could take up.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned, not making it taboo, like dispelling those myths around it that make it taboo, that make it uncomfortable and hush hush for people to discuss.
Yes.
What in your research and the work that you're doing, what makes this so taboo?
Social capital, right? Respectability politics. And so what makes this so taboo is one, shame. American,
Mm,
if we look at American as a spirit, American, North America, that's the other thing too, because there is a South America.
yeah.
But in North America, particularly in the United States history, we have not apologized for the harm caused to become the United States of America. And so the message is when you think about marketing, I just saw Khalil Green, a Yale graduate historian who talked about Badergate and the University of Florida and how they have this sports call called Badergate. But Badergate, talking to their opponents about Badergate, but Badergate comes from enslavers using African babies as Bader, as gates for
as
alligator.
as bait for
Right.
alligators.
And
Yeah.
so you have these very cruel practices that have become part of our social lexicon, and there is no ownership to have empathy or compassion for what's happened. And so there's this kind of dehumanization in our messages, particularly when you think about as Black professionals navigating corporate spaces, right? And so what I do in my work for folks who are looking to say, like, my leadership is impacting actually how I show up in my lovership. And so what I do is provide them space to kind of unpack and unlearn those societal messages, which I've gathered at least 17 different messages that we've learned,
Mm.
that's coded into our social engagement.
And where does sexuality and somatic play a role in this? Because you're talking about the lexicon, you're talking about terminologies. So how does our own physiology, our sexuality, our sensuality fit into that?
Absolutely. So there's also research that actually shows that dark skinned professionals are not seen favorably to their light skinned counterparts by their white colleagues, right? And so that's how sexuality shows up when we think of skin complexion and desirability, who can be trustworthy and who can be safe, who is actually capable, right? And the
Mm.
fact that colonialism supports the ideology of white supremacy, that if you come from a European background, history, heritage, that you are somehow chosen and therefore in the position to lead. And that shows up in our biases, our conscious and our unconscious biases, in how we make decisions. And so while I don't anymore do a very large, like, macro education, and we see the pushback of DEI initiatives because of these biases and how they show up in policymaking, I really work with the individuals who really want to improve their quality of life and their relationships with themselves and with others. So it comes to be more healing work because sexuality is all of who we are: mind, body, spirit, and energy. How comfortable we are in our body, how we dictate how we perform in our body, femininity, masculinity, um, people who are assertive or perceived as aggressive. And so sexuality was not just about sexual intercourse. I wanted de- to debunk that, right? Because I am living this experience where I'm like, wait a minute. And then when I went back to school for my second master's, become a sex therapist, because being a master's level social worker did not give me access to all the things that I knew that we were learning. We were starting coming from, like, the default of, well, it's always been this way.
Yeah.
And so that's how sexuality and somatics came in, because it was about, we are responding, we are living testimonies of our sexuality, and the somatics is about the internalized relationship to that and how we perform. And so it was a whole self approach that I was, like, as a therapist, could not ignore, and felt it would be unethical and irresponsible for me to ignore.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack.
Uh,
That's a lot
it,
to
it
unpack.
is, it is, it is. I know people are gonna be
Wow.
like, wait, hold on, let me go back and say that. So we can go slow, right? Because I do realize it's a lot to unpack. And these conversations are uncomfortable, but that's where intimacy is built. That's where trust is built. Trust
Hmm.
is not built by bypassing the discomfort. Trust is when we look at regulation and co-regulation, right? It is about being able to say, I'm uncomfortable with hearing these truths, with hearing this experience, and I need to process that versus, just project off of. And when I can self regulate, I'm creating space for myself to trust myself, and
Hmm.
now creating space for you to trust me. Now you
Yeah.
can trust me with your truth. And I find that's a big missing piece.
That self-trust piece, because I'm listening to you. And like I said at the beginning, I'm learning with all of you who are listening, right? And so this, thinking about my own experiences from what you're saying as a darker woman, from a child growing up, and I grew up in Australia. I grew up in a very predominantly white um, uh, environment, and feeling those feelings of insecurity and inferiority and wanting to be something that I was not, I also never really owned my own self. Like I
Mm,
didn't love or appreciate who I was. I didn't know how to. I didn't know where to find that permission, I guess, to give
yeah,
my
yeah,
permission myself permission to
absolutely.
love the color of my skin until,
Yes,
much later in life, but to love the color of my skin, to appreciate my heritage, to appreciate the sacrifices that were made for me to be where I am. And even just recently in the last few months, in the last 6 months, that I've embraced my own natural texture of my hair,
right,
right? All the
right,
things that make me who I am I rejected based on society, the environment that I grew up in. And and as you're talking about sexuality, loving yourself, feeling comfortable in your own body, in your own skin, and being so intimately connected to who you are, like that's the missing piece for a lot of, I would say, black women or minority women, is that how do we find the intimacy piece for ourselves without it being taboo, without it being, oh, what are you talking about? That's
yep,
yeah,
absolutely. One of the self parts is to give yourself permission to decenter other people's perception.
yeah.
Right? What we're responding to is other people's perception is what's desirable. I grew up in a multiracial household, right? My stepsisters, blonde hair, blue eyes, right? One to this day will not identify as biracial. And so the messages are hard to access. I had to give myself permission to say, is this really true? Where is this truth coming from?
Mm.
And so giving ourselves permission to question the truth is where our liberation lies.
A question our perception of the truth,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Our beliefs of what was true about us growing up, and
absolutely,
and how the images that are portrayed of what beauty is, or what desirability is,
yes,
uh and being, I always say that we have to create our own perception, or our own, um we have to create our own narrative of what beauty is,
absolutely,
understanding what that looks like. So when you
absolutely.
look in the mirror, you're actually accepting that in yourself,
Accepting the beauty of yourself,
of
right? Like,
yourself.
yes. And so these societal and sexual defaults, assumptions, and expectations is something that every human being is navigating. And so we're trying to figure out when there's called something called the matrix of oppression, where it is about the hierarchy. In the US, particularly, there's a racial caste system that is awarded, right? And then we're also living in a very classist system about the have and the have nots. And so when you think about how these parts show up for ourselves, they're kind of unspoken. We just respond
Hmm.
to them, right? You
Yeah.
think about the national conversation right now, the attack on Harvard, and the institution of Harvard, and the possible withdrawal of its 501c3 status. We look at Harvard in this very elevated space, but Harvard also too has a history of becoming Harvard because they benefited from enslavement. And
Yeah.
so there are these lures, there are these things that we want to perceive to attain and go for, but not necessarily again questioning how does that make us whole. So we can have degrees, we can have high level of achievements, and still not feel that intimacy, the emotional connection and vulnerability and strength of
Hmm.
like being authentically me. Like we have breath and therefore we are enough.
And it hides, you said earlier, in shame, right? A lot of this hides in shame because
Absolutely.
we've been made to feel shameful about
Ourselves.
things,
Mm-hmm.
about ourselves, or
Yeah.
about desires, about wanting things, whether it's sexual or not. It
Not
doesn't have to be.
absolutely.
It just having a desire for something that other people see as unattainable to you, they, hold you down and say, well, you can't do that, or you shouldn't even want that because it's not attainable for you.
That absolutely, absolutely. Imagine the audacity of it, right? Like having the audacity
Yeah.
to really to know that you are more than capable. And so when you start to connect these dots about how this society was brought into being, the messages along marketing and the importance of marketing and narratives, and
Yeah.
how we internalize these marketing narratives as truth, right? Pink and blue mean gender colors when before the late 1960s, like there
60s,
weren't, right,
there
there
was no gender
wasn't,
color.
there was no
Right.
gender
It
color.
was all that was all marketing. Yep.
Absolutely, right. And so marketing also has a history of perpetuating stereotypes, and that causes us to feel desirable, not desirable, right? They
Right.
say capitalism's greatest job is making us feel like that we're not enough because we're always consuming. Think about the word consumer,
Yeah.
right? It
That is not
literally,
an uplifting word. It is, you're
right?
taking, taking, taking,
Right.
and
And those of us who are in a position of like, we need to figure out how people can, oh, excuse me, become consumers, like that is something where it takes a toll on us. And
yeah.
then when I think about, so desire also too, folks, desire is not something we can do without. Desire is actually a drive that is needed in order to thrive.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Desire is, I always tell folks, it's different than a need. And so if we're going from our trauma narrative to our healing narrative, we're going to lean into the thing that we need that allows us to thrive. They call it a middle-age crisis because to outside perception looks like a middle-age crisis, but I'm like, it's an awakening. It's an
It's an awakening.
awakening
It's an
of
awakening.
of a mature person understanding their desires and wanting to live from that place.
Yeah. It's like, wait a second, wait a minute, time out here. My whole life up until now, I've been living for everyone around me.
Yes,
What do
yes.
I truly need, want, and desire?
Literally, how am I going to be seen? How am I going to be nurtured? How am I going to be taken care of? And as
And
women,
healing that heals the world because now you're giving from a full cup instead of just giving based on
yes,
what everybody else around you needs.
I asked a family member earlier this week. I was like, what would have happened if you had someone in your life that taught you how to make decisions? There's erotic intelligence, but is a combination of somatic intelligence and emotional intelligence. And part of emotional intelligence is decision making.
Yeah.
I asked him, I was like, what would you, how do people make decisions? He was like, by mistakes. And I was like, partly, but what if you had an elder in your life? You had someone in your life who also could teach you lessons so that way you didn't have to make those mistakes. And like, so it becomes this very generational thing as well, where we
Mm.
can pass this down of finding peace and pride and pleasure in ourselves from a place of wholeness. Desire is not saying I don't care about you. Desire is saying I care about you, and in consideration, I need to figure out where I am.
Hmm.
And so it's desire is an accountability practice.
Wow. Whew. All right. So I'm I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I wanted to talk a little bit about epigenetics with women
Yes.
specifically and our leadership role in how these things are passed on generation after generation, and it impacts us negatively because we don't understand the epigenetics of it. We don't understand how, and I think we started the conversation when we talked about
Yes.
decolonializing. But yeah, I want to dive back into that.
Please. Yes. Yes. So think about for women, and again, culturally, it will be different depending on people's cultural norms and things of that nature.
Correct.
Please take that into consideration as we're having this discussion. Um, And so for women, just in general, right, we're taught, I look at the lesson of sharing. The lesson of
Mhm.
sharing is that if someone sees if they desire something that we have and they ask for it, we're supposed to be selfless And
Hmm.
but what
Correct.
that also tells us is that our desires also don't matter.
It don't matter.
Right? And that we can't trust the other person to be disappointed with, thank you for desiring what I have, but I don't want to give it to you. Right? That we have agency and autonomy, the ability to make decisions and the ability to act on decisions that we make based from the place of what our desire and comfort is. Because all of this without feeling somatically safe, right, is also us going against our authenticity. And so as women, think about how we make decisions from a somatically safe place. We can
All right.
lean into our desires to say, this is what I want to do without the pressures of the world telling us the type of woman we're supposed to be.
Yeah. I love the fact that you use sharing because I want to push back a little bit on that because we are taught to share and
Mm-hmm.
sharing is polite and sharing is kind and it's our moral duty to share, right? If we have, we should be able to give to others who either have less than us or don't have it all.
Absolutely. So
So
that's just,
how do we
yes.
balance that
Sorry.
into what you're saying? Because if I
Absolutely.
have what I have and I'm like, I don't want to share it with you.
Yes. So,
I don't just don't want to. How do we now balance our moral? How do we raise our children to be good citizens of the world
yes.
without teaching them the
Yes.
value of sharing and still allow them to have that agency?
Discernment.
Okay.
Discernment. Discernment means the ability to judge well. It does not mean that we have to say no every time someone asks for what we do. But what is the decision making process? And how does one discern their choices? And so discernment is how we show up as caring, sharing, whole, somatically safe, intimately connected human beings, right? Is the ability to trust oneself. And somatically, that's our intuition. Somatically, that is like, what's the information that we are getting subconsciously, and when that connects to our who we are authentically with the information that we have, because our job is as human beings is to be as knowledgeable as we can. Not about smart, social intelligence, our
Right, right.
relationship
Yes,
intelligence.
yes.
And so discernment is that key, right? So
Mm.
with the lesson of sharing, it's about discerning. So there's more to the lesson. But the underlying lesson is we need to be discerning and sharing.
Right. Yes. Whew, that was good. That was really good. So,
Appreciate it.
how do we now start connecting to our desire? Because again, we went going back to erotic,
Yes.
that it dispels the shame, decharges all of that, and we can show up in our feminine power, in our erotic power, without it being perceived as, again, something taboo.
Um, with this, remember, we have no control over how other people perceive us.
Yes, so
And
true.
so if we are going to use our erotic power to nurture our feminine energy, and to soothe our masculine energy, then it really is about what I call unlearning the rush. We have to learn pace, because without pace, everything is always going to seem like it's too much.
Mhm.
And
That's
so
where you
what's
get
your relationship?
overwhelmed and you get burned
Yes.
out and you're trying too hard to do stuff.
So relationship to time, time and breath. That's where I start. Not by getting people to sit still. Meditation is about the ability to not fall down the rabbit hole. Or if you're in the rabbit hole, to activate an awareness to be like, no, and then can shift the energy outside of that rabbit hole. And so we want to use time and breath to pace us to activate the self permission, so that way we can lean more into nurturing our feminine energy and that erotic power, what we need to nurture that femininity. Pace
Mm.
yourself, right?
Patient. Yeah.
Pace yourself. Unlearn things. Slow down. There's something I call a presence practice. The Center of Desire, the Center of Erotic Intelligence gives 5 parts of erotic intelligence, and they have this called self-awareness on steroids. the one of the components. And so in my work, I call it a presence practice. And so where I have people to say, here's what you do with your emotional intelligence and your somatic intelligence. And it's awareness, intention, and effort. And so you
Mm.
develop a presence practice that allows you to stay connected to self and not disassociate, not to avoid or to become impulsive, but you activate that presence practice, which over time becomes your embodied practice, to lean into your erotic power, to center your erotic power, and to magnify your femininity.
Mm. That
It's a
sounds
beautiful, it's beautiful.
fascinating.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's beautiful. I've been doing this work for 22 years. I've been a sex therapist for almost the last 10. And to develop this work, develop this pathway, um, and from a place of crisis, surviving crisis and thriving. And so, folks, I'm not
Yeah.
saying this from a place of, I'm saying this from a place of being on the other side
Yeah.
of
Having
receiving
gone
love.
through.
Yes. And so
And
that's the caveat too.
I have a couple other questions. This has been so incredible. One question is around how many people need this type of sexual healing, like healing their sexuality, healing their desire, healing themselves from within that core space, men and women. How many people would you say need to go through that kind of healing?
All of us.
I
Everybody.
knew the answer to the
Everybody.
question before I asked. But
Everybody. We
everybody.
all do. It should be a value. I feel like in other countries there is a value, like understanding a wholeness, and that this isn't taboo, that allows people to live very honestly. And so for all of us, comprehensive sex ed is only legal in like 11 states. That's actual, factual, medically accurate. There are several other states that are like, yes, we need to have sex ed. And we see this reversion in society. So we all need it because people are really coming from a very misinformed, shame-based place.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
time to heal the shame.
Yeah. Sex ed for me was shameful. It was like, we approached it in the 70s,
Boogeyman
80s,
scary.
just
Mm-hmm.
very, very, we don't talk about it. You don't
Yeah.
talk about it at all. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the final thing I wanted to just for you to share or touch on is the cognitive dissonance that we experience because we started off talking about colonialism, and I listened to someone recently talk about the level of cognitive dissonance that the colonizers had to go through in order to perpetuate that Black people are worthless, lazy, and dirty. And and this was a white person saying this. He said they call them lazy, but yet they were working the fields for 12, 15, 20 hours. They were working, doing the hard backbreaking labor.
As
They
young
were
as
called
3.
labor. Right. But they were called lazy. They were called dirty, but you hired them to clean your house. They were called irresponsible, but yet they raised your children. So the level of cognitive dissonance that was going on to associate a race of people, and I'm just, because I listened to that, I'm just using this as a reference. But any kind of cognitive dissonance that you have to go through to call any group of people one thing, but then also expect them to do the exact opposite of that thing, and not question it. And I think that's where you were talking about starting to question the perception of truth,
Yeah.
right? So just explain, like, from the brain, how does that even happen? Is it just programming?
No. It's a value base. So I think the other thing too is like this was not folks hired, these were folks enslaved.
Yeah.
And so this is a part that colonialism has done also too. Colonialism has taken not religion because it used religion, it weaponized religion, but it took spirit out of religion.
Hmm.
Spirit is your consciousness. It is where your values set. And so at some point, we've got to say that in human existence, there are people who can be cruel. And we can do the all not, but we're talking about a value system. And so the cognitive dissonance is literally about the South not having a certain value that is outside of humanizing other people. That's not a brain thing. That's a spirit thing. And that's when someone who was like, my conscious awareness of my energy is that I want to be superior and that I do not want to give value to those who are human, because willful ignorance and infantilization will not happen. It's not allowed. These are grown individuals, adults who had the wherewithal to do the hard labor, but chose not to because power and wealth became more important. It continues to drive our value system. And so it wasn't a brain thing, it was a value thing. And it was the brains agreeing to the value and the body responding to that agreement.
Wow.
And that is why, it's important to decolonize even somatics, because somatic work, what we understand it, in Western culture and the culture that we understand it, is that it still takes out the relationship to spirit. It still takes out the relationship to valuing the connectiveness that we have with each other, even without understanding. You don't have to understand to accept, right? And so, and then the universal understanding that we're all connected. You can see it in neuroscience, you can see it in neuroplasticity, right? Like there's the research out there that shows that this thing called spirit is real. It's not a woo-woo.
Spirit is real.
Right?
It is real.
And so we recognize that as professionals, spirit informs how we show up in spaces, but with the separation, we don't show up as spiritual beings in professional spaces, but that does inform that. And so the origin of labor and the birth of U.S. capitalism was without spirit, and it continues to dehumanize. And we see that in today's labor practices.
My goodness. I hope you all got as much value out of this brief conversation as I did, because this was fascinating. Thank you so much, Queen, for like deconstructing some of this and bringing this information to us, because I am always searching for truth and questioning, and I've taught my children to question things. Like, don't just accept things that don't feel right, to your spirit, that don't resonate with your spirit. Like, question it and research it. And so I appreciate all the hard work that you've done in learning all of this. Double master's degrees and doing that really difficult work, clinical work, as well as working with a lot of patients, working with a lot of people to really unpack this. And this is just a snippet of your brilliance that we've been able to share. But I thank you so much for being willing to come on the show and share this. And I hope the women kind of can at least start the journey of healing.
Right. Feel empowered and trust yourself. Like, because what you're feeling for a reason.
Yeah.
And I confirmed that for you in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And please stay connected. We'll have Queen's information in the show notes, so that if you want to reach out to her and find out more about her work, or you want to bring her on as a speaker for yourself, please connect with her as well. And then make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video and leave a comment if anything that we shared today spoke to you. And with that, I would like to say, to be bold, to be brave, and every day continue to do one thing to step out with audacious confidence. Until next time, I will see you on another episode of Unleash Your Audacious Confidence. Thank you. Turnover. It's incredibly expensive for any organization, but especially those that are small and mid-size. If you're an organization and you're hiring, it's so important to get it right. You need to identify the right people for the right roles. Here at Audacious Concepts, Inc., we help you perfect your hiring process so you get it right every single time. Reach out to us at audaciousconceptsinc.com